Welcome back to our discussion, Journey to Delivering the Mission in the Cloud, Part 2, sponsored by Oracle and Intel here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Laura Karup. She's the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Chezian Sivignanam is the Chief Enterprise Architect at the National Science Foundation. Debbie Stevens is Deputy Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And Steve Prescott, Executive Program Director for the Public Sector at Oracle. And before the break, our topic was application rationalization. And why don't we continue on that, because I think everybody has pretty strong feelings about that as a requisite to really successful cloud deployment. And so, Debbie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I would start with the end user, and that seems like an odd place, but I think one of the colleagues here had said, why do people want to hold on to a particular application, even though it might feel like it's end of life and it should be in a different state? And I think for us in the USPTO, because we have somewhat heavily custom apps, that tendency to hold on to the application, even though the end of life is probably past, and they're still trying to understand how do they bridge to the next state. So I think starting with the end user and understanding from a pure customer or stakeholder relationship can really help the IT understand what bridge they need to build to get them there. I think as scary as change is, and as scary as IT transformations that the agencies are undertaking, most people want to grow and go to the next state. They just need, I'll say, help seeing it and seeing that their job, and I'll think about it in the terms of the data center, because I think in our arena in particular, we talked about earlier about perhaps the data center shrinking, but that doesn't mean the job is going away. In fact, we want to reskill the team there into the new ways of working. And I think also the stakeholders need to see that too, and then they'd be willing to let go. And that's been our approach. And
so to make an analogy then, one of the jobs of IT then is to, just as you had server huggers, make them understand it's not the server they want, it's the computing capacity.
Absolutely.
And that could be anywhere to the people that use applications to convince them it's not that application set, that code you need, it's some function that you're trying to do to get your job done.
Absolutely. It's focusing on the outcome and the capabilities that will drive and provide, as I call it, the bridge to the new, either the new way of working or the new cloud strategy.
Sure. Chezian? Application rationalization and...
So at the foundation, like I said, we're a single mission agency, so we don't have the bigger problem like duplication of services. We are dealing with a different set of problems, right? So for example, it's really the multi-cloud environment now. So for financial system is already on the cloud, the shared service provider. Now the same group wants to, for example, do a budget system, right? The question is, where do you want to put it? So you want to put it closer to the financial system, or you want to have your own cloud? So how do you make this kind of decisions, right? So we use the governance process, really. It's a custom edition. The first question we ask is, are you guys okay if the data being in two different places? How is it going to help your business? We start asking these questions, and it really helps the customer come to the conclusion where would be the right fit. End of the day, if they decide to put it in two different places for specific reasons, we are with them. So it's really a customer edition, and we have the solid governance process designed, which is really working well for us in this.
And I guess there again, if you have two applications that might interrelate in different locations, it's not the locations that are the issue, is can you do it without latency?
Right. It's latency and it's the data. The data, I mean, everything is data centric in the cloud era. I mean, we used to have in the olden days, it's more network, on-prem, this data center kind of thing. Now it's all about data. It doesn't matter where the data is, but you need to have a centralized access to them. And that is the key.
And let's face it, when everything was centralized in the data center, you could still have latency problems as the disks got all fragmented over the years. It was just as slow as some of the clouds are. Well, we've talked a lot about application rationalization and also new architectures, new governance strategies, whole new IT strategies. I guess we need to really discuss the kind of people and talent that we are talking about. I think Debbie, you mentioned reskilling. So what's your human capital thinking as you approach the multiple cloud world of IT? Anybody?
I'll jump in. I actually think application rationalization and planning for the cloud highlight some of the new skills that we need within IT. With managed service providers, I like to think that IT needs to make sure we're educated customers, right? We're now going to be purchasing things that used to be done either in-house by federal staff or contractors, but we need to know enough to make sure we can still translate between business needs and objectives and the managed service that we're purchasing. We also need new soft skills in terms of service design, human-centered design to help our business customers make these transitions. If you're looking at application rationalization, there's a value proposition for the end user, which is I now am probably going to have better user experience. I'm going to get more frequent updates, but I'm going to have to give up some of this tightly coupled, highly customized functionality. That's going to involve business process reengineering, and it's going to involve change management to make sure that's successful. And we need to be partners in a process where we can make a set of interrelated business and technology decisions and help chart that path, as opposed to just thinking about all these technology choices as one-offs.
Yeah, that user experience idea we tend to think of as something for the deployed public applications. But is it also true for the internal applications that your own staff will use?
Absolutely. And in the past, when we've done modernization efforts, you have these large monoliths and you say, okay, we're going to put this on this bright, shiny new stack. All our problems will be solved. And then they kick off by sitting down with the end users and saying, well, what are your requirements? And the end user says, well, I have a drop-down box here that sends it to Susie, and I have a drop-down box here that sends it to Joe. And then we rebuild all of that on this bright, shiny new stack. And we don't really get the promise that we could have out of this effort. Now that we're moving to cloud and breaking up these larger monoliths into smaller services and systems, really working with end users to understand that underlying objective and being able to think creatively about re-engineering the process as we re-engineer the technology is really important.
Steve.
Yeah, so I'd echo one of the things that Laura mentioned about it's a combination of hard skills and soft skills. That's certainly what we're seeing. And I think of it in terms of technology skills and non-technology skills. So in the area of technology, things like overall architecture. We've always had enterprise architects, but that's even more important in the cloud era than it was before, because you need to have someone who understands both traditional architecture on-premise, because some of that still exists, and has an appreciation for the new architecture in the cloud. Application development is another skill area. Application in development in the cloud, especially if you do things involving microservices, machine learning, analytics, that's a very different skill set than what a lot of federal agencies traditionally had. So that would be another area to focus. Migration is a very important. And migrating workloads can be very workload specific. How you migrate a PeopleSoft application may be different than how you would migrate an SAP application. And so having the right people who have not just general purpose knowledge, but actual experience having migrated those workloads, that can make the difference between success or failure. In the non-technical area, two skill sets that I think are increasingly important are financial analysis and vendor management. Financial analysis, because the way that you fund investments in the cloud is very different than the way that you traditionally funded investments in an on-premise data center. On-premise, you would have large capital outlays in the beginning for hardware and software licenses, followed by years of maintenance support. In the cloud, much of that capital cost goes away as you move to a subscription model. And so having people with financial analysis skills to be able to compare those two is very important. And then the other one I mentioned...
That sort of mirrors the CapEx to OpEx.
It does, exactly. Because of the CapEx to OpEx transition, you need people who appreciate both and can do the comparative analysis. And then the last one I wanted to mention of non-technical skills is vendor management. Federal agencies have to work very closely with their vendors in migrating to the cloud for a variety of reasons. Some software is licensed by CPU or licensed in various ways, so you need to get input from your vendor on, do I have the appropriate licenses to operate this in the cloud? And then there are technical considerations when you're working with your vendors as well. Most vendors will have best practice documentation, maybe even tools, but you need to have a good, productive working relationship with your vendor in order to gain access to all of those tools.
Okay. Sure.
On the workforce, upskilling the workforce subject, so we usually, I echo both Laura and Steve. On top of that, we also look for, I'm going to go layer by layer. The bottommost, like the IT, which is really providing services to the customers, we are looking for cloud architects, DevOps, cybersecurity, cloud native. These are really the meat of it, right, that we look for. And in the middle, where really now we are going the customers, right, people are using. Now, remember I talked about the platform services, where we are really looking for people to do more self-service capabilities. So that's where we're looking for people to use advanced skills to do their own job better. That's like data science, the robotic process automation, those kind of things. And then the people at the top who are really making decisions, right, they're looking at the IT investments, rationalizing the portfolio of those kind of things. They need to be educated on cloud and what kind of things it's bringing, how you go to the cloud, you start. It's really the cloud 101 that's very important at that point. So the various layers, it kind of transforms, but these are the key significant skills.
And you mentioned self-service and RPA, and I was just talking to a CFO the other day who is kind of the lead for RPA in his agency. And there are tools now where people can design their own robotic process automation with a little bit of training that are not traditionally software coders.
Right.
That seems to be a cloud feature that's coming in where people can move boxes around in a graphical user interface and create business processes. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, exactly. The two focus areas in the foundation right now is educating customers how to build their own robots. It's really a low-code solution where people don't have no clue about how to write software. They can use this simple tool to build like a flow chart that eventually functions like a robot. The other thing is people who are sitting closer to data, the subject matter experts. They're traditionally not an IT people, but they know their data very well. And these are the people we are looking to educate on data science, how we can apply some of the Python or some of the algorithm skills, because they are the one who is going to invent new algorithms that can be enabled back in our services to add intelligence. So those are the two key things we are really after at this point.
All right, in the couple of minutes we have left, I just wanted to explore something that Steve had said earlier, and that is the notion of cloud providers in a commercial sense and technical sense cooperating with one another. And aside from the fact that they are always competing for contracts, they all have multiple customers, and they know that their customers are also customers of their competitors. And so is that something that you look for and try to emphasize when you're dealing and choosing with a cloud supplier, that a cloud services provider? I want you to make sure that we can cooperate with you as Cloud X with Cloud Y and Z. Is that a consideration? Does that come up?
Yeah, I think, so I would echo the one comment I made, which you alluded to just a second ago, which was the cooperation across multiple vendors, or multiple cloud providers. But in terms of choosing an actual cloud provider, there are 5 areas that we see federal agencies looking at. The first is the workloads themselves. Make sure that that cloud provider has the tools, has the infrastructure, has the people to handle your workloads, because that's not a foregone conclusion. So number one, look at your workloads. Number 2, investment protection. Federal agencies have invested a lot of money in software licenses, in the skills of their people, in some cases in high-performing hardware infrastructure. When you move to the cloud, make sure you don't lose that. You want to be able to leverage your investments, not throw them away and have to buy that stuff all over again. The third area is service levels, is that when you move to the cloud, you are trusting that cloud service provider to deliver a quality of service to your end users. Part of that is availability, and so you need to have service level agreements around availability. But there are 2 other areas that are equally important: performance and manageability. And so as you're looking at cloud service providers, look at, do they have SLAs or service level objectives around availability and performance and manageability. The fourth area is hybrid cloud, is that we're all going to be living in a hybrid cloud environment for multiple years. It could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. That means multiple clouds, and that means the coexistence of your cloud and something running in your on-premise data center. So as you are evaluating cloud providers, look at their support for a hybrid cloud model. Do they have solutions that run on-premise? Are there solutions in the cloud interoperable with what you have on-premise? That's very important. And then the last area I mentioned is migration. And I alluded to this before, is that don't just assume that you can migrate your workloads to any cloud. Some are easier or harder than others. Some may actually not even be certified to run your workloads. And so look carefully at what migration tools, what migration services are available from each cloud provider, and do they match your requirements? Okay,
Laura, we'll give you the last 10 seconds. What do you want your whole cloud environment to look like a year from now?
Absolutely. I think if we could focus on anything in our cloud environment, it's really going to be automation. I think at many federal agencies, we've had great success in some spaces with pilots or initial projects, but we want this to be self-service across environments, services, applications. We want our end user to be able to spin things up quickly and to know that it's inherited key policies to allow us to feel very confident about security in the cloud. So really focusing on automation as we grow.
All right, we'll end on that note. Thank you all for a great discussion. My guests today, and I'd like to thank them again, are Laura Korup, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Chezian Sivignanam, Chief Enterprise Architect at the National Science Foundation, Debbie Stevens is Deputy Chief Information Officer at U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and Steve Prescott, Executive Program Director for the Public Sector at Oracle. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and visit Oracle.